Got 2 first-round picks again in Houston with the Deshaun Watson trade. And pick number 2 overall, not pick number 1, but pick number 2 overall. Where are we going to start here with the Houston Texans? Let me see what else they have here. Sorry, free agency-wise. I usually do a little reset. Another one of those teams where on paper, only 2 free agents on defense and only 2 on offense. And not really big names. The biggest name is Obo Okoronkwo.
Yeah, and they have the most draft capital of any team in the NFL by a pretty big distance.
This is what they've been waiting for, right? We've sat here doing this exercise the last couple of years, and we've suggested that when they go to free agency, find some younger-ish players that could be a part of the long-term deals. They haven't. They've gotten 1- and 2-year contracts, but now they can completely rebuild from the draft here.
So the first decision to make, I think, is do you try and undo the damage done by winning that game and taking yourself out of the number 1 overall pick and trade with Chicago? The Adam Schefter is reporting today the self-evident fact that Chicago is happy to listen to offers for that number 1 overall pick.
A shocking turn of events.
So, you either sit there at 2 and get a quarterback, or you trade up to number 1 and guarantee the one you want. Because otherwise, and in particular, the Texans, because one of the most likely teams to trade a number 1, if it isn't them, is Indianapolis within the division. So do you have enough faith that Indianapolis is not interested in the guy you're interested in, and are you prepared to wait till number 2 for your guy?
Yeah, so you mentioned all the draft capital. The Texans have 5 picks in the top 73 and 6 in the top 104. So a lot of significant picks, 12 total picks. They have number 2 and number 12 in the first round. I think you might grab a couple of those picks and just go up to number 1, if you just to ensure that you get your guy. The other thing too is if you don't love all of them, what if you took 2? You don't have to give up a ton to get up to 1, and then you held the cards and started listening to trade offers, including from the division rival Colts and including the Panthers and the Raiders and anyone else that might want to trade up. What if you decided to do that as the Texans?
If you trade up to
1 and then put 1 on the market again.
It's unlikely you're going to get back more than what you gave up to go up to number 1. Otherwise,
sure it is, because the Bears aren't dropping as far, so you don't have to give up as much to get to 1. Say the Bears, you might give up pick 65, right? Like early third, or even if it was 33, even if it was like your best second round pick, you give up 33 to move up 1 spot. That's pretty steep. But say you just give up your third round pick, you can get more in return to go from 1 back to 4, 7, or 9. I don't know. What's the going rate from 2 to 1? Is it that significant?
I don't know, but it's probably going to cost you a decent amount, and I don't.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Chicago is unlikely to take a worse deal just to stay within the top 4, I would say.
All right, go get a quarterback.
Particularly, by the way, if Indianapolis is one of the other offers, because even then,
they might go crazy.
The difference between 2 and 4 for Chicago is effectively negligible. The difference between 2, 4, and then maybe 7 or 9 is a different conversation. But if Indy is one of the other teams available, which, by the way, you're unlikely to trade with because, you're in the division. So,
yeah,
I generally think from start to finish, your idea is bad.
Okay. Trade up for 1. Get the quarterback. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I was just talking through it on air like anyone else would.
It's fine. There are no dumb ideas until there are.
You lay off, man.
So, who's your quarterback? Bryce Young?
Bryce Young. I'll go Bryce.
Okay.
So we're getting Bryce Young. He's our quarterback. What else do we have to do here with the rest of our draft capital? And
we have an inside source now with the Houston Texans, and he was useless when it came to talking about
I thought you were going to break something.
No. Yeah. When it came to talking about which quarterback they were going to get, utterly useless.
Don't get Bobby fired.
PFF_Bobby had no information for us whatsoever.
Per usual. Seems to be the trend here. He won't let us break news. Won't give us any information on which quarterback he likes.
No.
Won't go out on a limb about anything.
Yeah.
Texans have a lot of cap space as well. So is this finally the time? Who's their biggest free agent signing over the last 2 years?
They haven't had any. It's probably Obo again.
One person has to be the biggest. Obo Okoronkwo at $3.5 million.
Right.
So are they going to tap into free agency a little bit here? It's like they're potentially returning all starting offensive linemen, but there's some improvement to be made there. As with every team, playmakers. Like let's get some receivers in here. By the way, I love pushing Davis Mills down to backup. I like Davis Mills as a backup here.
It is interesting though that you would imagine that they would be in a similar position to Washington, or not Washington, to Chicago in terms of cap space. Like they've had a couple of years to get their house in order so that when they finally get rid of Deshaun Watson, they can spend and build around whoever the new guy's going to be. And they've got money, but they don't have Bears money, Like they've got 26 million of effective cap space right now, which is less than a third of what Chicago has, having torn the entire roster down and sort of designed around this year. And even Atlanta, it's half of what they have, having got rid of Matt Ryan, having taken the really punishing dead cap hit, and then look towards this season to start really rebuilding. It's vaguely surprising how little room the Texans actually have when you consider how long they've had sort of line of sight of this.
Now, as we've suggested with every other team, second wave of free agency is probably the best place to live here. But the Texans are one of those teams, I think, where you want to be aggressive and, make some bigger splash type of plays.
Well, what do they want? So they're not going to be massive spenders in free agency. They're going to be, picking up a few of those second wave guys, maybe in the first wave of timing. But they're not going to go out there and make 3 or 4 massive splash moves to try and move this roster. So they're going to be doing this largely through the draft. They've got the most draft capital of anybody, even if they spend a little bit to get up to number 1. You draft Bryce Young. He's your quarterback. Now what do you do?
So I think if you have DeMeco Ryans coming in, and I wonder how much you try to, it's not always replicate, but what you're comfortable with, what you are comfortable with, or what he's had in San Francisco is a really good defensive line. Maybe they bring Charles Omenihu back, right, who just had a lot of success with DeMeco Ryans, started his career with the Texans. I think Omenihu could be a free agent that you bring in, but I think you're trying to load up on the defensive line, on that side of the ball at least. And then we'll only come back to receiver and tight end, but on the defensive side, Derek Stingley didn't have the best rookie season, but still have faith in him. Steven Nelson, a good solid veteran on the other side, had a solid season, and Desmond King has become solid veteran. I mean, that secondary could be pretty good, and DeMeco Ryans has gotten the most out of his cornerback group over the last couple of years with the Niners. Jalen Petrie, if he could just tackle better, which is a big if, but that tends to revert back to the mean. He had 24, 25 missed tackles last year as a rookie safety. On paper, I think they could have a decent secondary. I think this offseason, try to bring back Okoronkwo cheap. Maybe you bring in an Omenihu, and you need some sort of alpha defensive lineman there. Maybe that's somebody at 12 that you're looking at. But yeah, I think they're loading up in the trenches on that side, and then looking at perimeter players to complement Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like if you're going to get the quarterback, particularly if it's going to be Bryce Young, and the one concern you have about him is unprecedented size or Doug Flutie size, you have to do as much as humanly possible to make sure he's got things to work with. So receivers and offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Laramie Tunsil was one of the best pass-blocking left tackles in the NFL last year, but this offensive line for a while has kind of been Laramie Tunsil and other people. Kenyon Green, their first-round pick from a year ago, was rough year one. Rough, I mean, in his defense, going up against a pretty ugly slate of really, really good interior defensive linemen almost on a weekly basis. But, that's the NFL these days. So either he needs to take a massive step forward or they're going to need to keep firing at that offensive line. Brandon Cooks is their one top-end receiver who might end up getting traded away. If you're trading away Brandon Cooks, you're going to need to replace him with something, because after that it's Nico Collins, who's a nice role player, but hasn't really suggested that he can step into a Brandon Cooks kind of void. John Mechie, who obviously was dealing with his cancer. Is that what he had?
Yes.
I don't know what his status actually is heading into this year, but probably not something you can rely on. So they might end up spending their second number one pick, number 12, on a wide receiver for Bryce Young.
Was that McShay? That was McShay's mock, where they went I think Bryce Young and then Quentin Johnston. They went quarterback and then receiver.
Yeah.
And we had some sort of Elias stat.
Right. First time since whenever that somebody is.
First time since Tebow and Demaryius Thomas.
Oh, okay.
That a team drafted a quarterback and a receiver in the first round for each other. Again, I feel like I don't love Quentin Johnston. I know there's a lot of people that do. I'm okay to, say there's a chance he could be good, and I'm going to rewatch him and have, maybe change my feelings on him. Who knows? But a big-bodied receiver who's not great at the catch point for his size, but does have good speed. We'll see if he runs this week, and if that ends up changing things. If he runs in the 4.4s at 6'4" or something like that. But Quentin Johnston's the number one receiver on our draft board. There's a bit of a drop before Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith and Jigba. But if we're talking at 12, Johnston absolutely could be available there.
Yeah.
And then you add that to Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins, and that looks good.
I also think, Jordan Addison reminds me a lot of Garrett Wilson in terms of just being good at everything. And because of that, those guys tend to get overlooked or knocked a little bit because everybody's looking for the next Jamar Chase, and you're going to see multiple people telling you there's no Jamar Chase in this draft class, as if that's a realistic standard. But if you're looking for a Jamar Chase, Johnson is the guy that you look at and say, all right, he's big, he's fast, like he has the ceiling maybe that can become that guy. Because guys like Garrett Wilson or Addison don't necessarily have that ceiling, it's like, oh, well, we got to drop those guys a little bit. But if he's just good at everything, that's worth 12 overall. And Garrett Wilson was worth, when did he go, 10 overall? Those guys that are just impactful, good playmakers that can run after the catch, that can get open, that can separate deep at all levels. Draft those guys. Like, they're good players. The fact that they can't necessarily become Jamar Chase should not be a reason to not draft them, A, as the first receiver in the draft, but B, as high as number 12 overall.
You want to give him Addison?
I think that wouldn't be a bad move.
All right. I can accept that. We're working together here. We have Bryce Young and Jordan Addison. Let's go crazy here. What about on the turn? I don't know if this is available, if this is a possibility, but Dalton Kincaid, the tight end out of Utah, that is jumping Michael Mayer in a lot of rankings here. Kincaid, about 240 pounds, more of an H-back type of body, but add him to this offense. He might be there at 32. I don't know if he'll be that first-round pick because of the size. He doesn't, like, Mayer looks like your traditional wide tight end. Those guys tend to be valued a little bit higher. Remember Cole Kmet going at 40 overall out of Notre Dame as well. So I'll say right now, I think Mayer goes over Kincaid. Kincaid may be on the turn at number 33 in the second round. Now you've got your big-bodied receiver and a really slick route-running tight end, and Kincaid potentially as your second option here.
Yeah, or if you just keep, you double dip at wide receiver. What if two of your first three picks are wide receivers for?
Oh wait, you gave Addison. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, for your quarterback to play with.
So Zay Flowers, who we've mentioned for everybody, Tank Dell, Josh Downs. Those are the next guys on our board.
Yeah, and maybe people don't like or are scared away by Jackson Smith and Jigba's injury and the whatever 40 time he ends up posting or doesn't post this pre-draft process. Maybe he ends up sliding as far as the top of the second.
If you are taking a forward-looking approach, though, Larry Tunsil at left tackle, center Justin Britt, right guard AJ Cann, and right tackle Titus Howard. 4/5 of your offensive line are all heading into the last year of their respective contracts. I'm a big fan of right tackle prospect DeJuan Jones out of Ohio State. He could be a nice early second round. He's my draft equivalent of Kelvin Beachum, I would say. If you're not going to get Kelvin Beachum for $1.5 million in free agency, you could draft DeJuan Jones late, in the second round. So I think offensive line is another place that if they are taking a multi-year approach here, they might want to spend a couple picks there as well. So you want to double up on receivers. I actually might grab a DeJuan Jones here as well.
Yeah.
But do we go all offense, or is this another one of those, it's DeMeco Ryans, defensive coach, tries to put his stamp on the defense, and they actually go to that side of the ball?
I'm sure DeMeco Ryans would love some defenders, but it kind of feels like this should be, like this. Your number one priority is going to be, we now have a quarterback for the first time in a while. Let's make sure this guy succeeds, particularly if they've sort of gone out on a limb to trade up to number one to draft a guy, if it's Bryce Young, who is whatever his size is going to be, 5'10", 180, like that's a lot of kind of gamble to take and then go, but we're going to give you one receiver and then you got to figure it out from there, son. You know what I mean? You give that guy some help and give him as much help as you can. You have a huge amount of draft picks. You can still get defense in a little while, but let's make sure we're giving this guy as much help as we can.
I'm going to propose one more thing, but let's say high level, here's our Texan strategy. Let's get young on offense, not only Bryce, but also age-wise. Let's get younger on offense. That's where we're going to spend our draft capital, and let's use the last couple of years of Texans free agent strategy on defense. Stitch it together defensively for year one here. Trust D'Amico, coaching it X's and O's, coaching it a schematic advantage.
Right.
Here's one other thing I might propose here. For this, your connections with the 49ers, right? The Niners, we talked on the last show about all the stars that they need to re-sign. Could you trade for a Brandon Ayuk with the Niners?
Yeah.
Are the Niners going to get to a point where they can't pay everybody? Debo and Kittle and Bosa and everybody, all the stars there, McCaffrey. Maybe call the old friends, John Lynch, and flip some of that draft capital. They need draft capital. They've only got the 5 draft picks. I would take Brandon Ayuk. Is he good enough to be that 1 and then push Cooks to a 2 and Collins to a 3 and Mechie and Amari Rodgers and all those guys down a notch?
Well, I think they'd probably be trading away Brandon Cooks at that point, which whatever you're getting for Brandon Cooks can be a big part of what you're trading for Ayuk. I like that idea. I think that's a good one.
Good. Steve came up with a good idea.
Yeah, 1 for 1 or 1 and 1.
Finally. All right. So high level, we have a strategy for the Texans. Feel good about that?
Yeah. Trade up to number 1. Don't love that. We'll be annoyed, frustrated that I had to do that because we won a game for no reason. Get my guy, quarterback, give him some help, draft a wide receiver. I like drafting, so forget double dipping with those. Draft a wide receiver at 12, whichever your guy is there, and then trade for Brandon Ayuk. Now all of a sudden, you got Brandon Ayuk, you got whoever you drafted at 12, you got Nico Collins, Mechie if and when he comes back.
Trade Cooks, recoup some draft capital there.
Right. Then you can draft offensive line.
Then you can go DeJuan Jones, 2nd round.
Assuming you still have that pick.
True. Yeah, maybe not if you traded Ayuk. Probably don't have that anymore.
But you get something back for Cooks. That could be a 2nd. Like, who knows? We'll have to see what we're left with. But
yeah.
Offensive line.
Well, we're on the phone lines here.
Yeah.
We're talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there we go. Texans, fixed.